Happy Friday, everybody. Welcome to the College Football Live Show with @SportsGuyChris. Happy to have you guys here. Checking in for my first show here. Very excited to be hooked up with the Spotlight Sports Network. And today I'm going to cover a little bit of college football. We have a full slate of games tomorrow. We are inching closer to the end of the season. It's been a whirlwind of a season, as you could say. So, yeah. Anyway, sorry about that. Back in. Excuse me. So the first topics I'd like to talk about are a couple of the games tomorrow. I have my eyes on a couple of games, a couple of picks I'd like to give you guys, and we'll kind of go through the landscape, what tomorrow's games mean for the college football playoff picture, and then kind of a little bit of an assessment of where that stands at the moment. Hey, what's up? Good morning. Good morning. Good afternoon to those of you on the West or East Coast. Excuse me. Morning time still here on the West Coast. Welcome everybody. So the first game I'd like to talk about tomorrow features, a game probably not necessarily huge on the radar. A few weeks ago it was, but the teams have kind of dropped off. But I'm talking about Texas and Kansas State in the Big 12 Conference. Both of those teams are, not going to be in, the conference title picture in the Big 12. That's pretty well determined. It looks like it's going to be Iowa State and Oklahoma most likely playing for that. Hey, what up, Jake? Snake Sports Talk Show. But interesting thing there, we've got the coach there at Texas, Todd Herman. He has been, by all accounts, kind of a disappointment. The general consensus is Texas hasn't been able to kind of live up to their standards or reach their potential under Herman. He had some meetings with those in power there at Texas this week, getting, the boost of confidence and all that kind of stuff, which is never necessarily a good sign. But, the Longhorns fell to just 5-3 on the season. This was supposed to be the year that they directly competed with Oklahoma for that conference title. Anywho, I love the Longhorns in this game. They're at Kansas State. The Wildcats, of course, pulled a big upset early in the season. They went to Norman. They were trailing big time in the second half. They erased a large second half deficit, rallied to beat Oklahoma on the Sooners' home field. But then ever since then, it's been a little bit of a roller coaster. The last 4 games, they've all lost. It started with a 37-10 setback at West Virginia, and then kind of continued along. They played Oklahoma State very tough, dropped that one. Then they were completely annihilated by Iowa State and lost to, kind of an underwhelming Baylor team last week by a point. So Kansas State comes in reeling. Texas comes in knowing they are essentially playing for their coach's job. Look, either Texas is going to show up today or they're not going to show up altogether. So I like the Longhorns going into their matchup tomorrow. That's an early game. A 9 a.m. kickoff West Coast time, noon time on the East Coast. But right now, Texas is a 7-point favorite. I like the Longhorns all day long on that 7 points, and I would not be surprised if they won the game by 10 or more. Again, I'm banking on Texas finally showing up and playing for their coach in this one. So that is one of my picks for tomorrow, one I feel very strong about. If you're looking for a game there in the early slate, jump on Texas. I think they're going to take care of business. I think Kansas State's going to continue their slide. Moving on, we're going to talk about another Texas team, but a team going very much in the opposite direction of the Longhorns, and that, of course, is Texas A&M. The Aggies come in ranked number 5 for the second week in a row in the College Football Playoff Committee's rankings. Their lone setback was a defeat to Alabama early in the season at Alabama. They weren't really competitive in that game. The Crimson Tide really kind of took it to them in that one. But ever since then, the Aggies have reeled off win after win, including a big one over Florida at home, 41-38, again, earlier in the season. So that is still holding up as one of the more impressive victories out there, and that is why the Aggies are in the number 5 spot. All of that being said, I still don't really see a path for them to get to the college football playoff, mainly because they're not even going to get in the SEC title game. Alabama is going to be in the SEC title game over them and playing Florida. So you start to look at that, and it becomes kind of difficult to envision a scenario. Now, Unless, Clemson were to lose to Notre Dame in the ACC title game for a second time, a 2-loss Clemson team would probably, without a conference title, slide out of that mix, and that might be enough to open the door for A&M to slide in, of course, provided that Alabama takes care of Florida in the SEC title game. So A&M, in the number 5 spot, but still, in my opinion, a difficult road to get in the playoff. That being said, they've got their last test of the season. They're at Auburn tomorrow, a team they've struggled to beat in the last couple of years, a team they've really struggled to compete with. Auburn's been more physical than them and kind of took it to them over the past, couple of meetings. It's not the same Auburn team this year. We know that they're not quite as big up front defensively compared to the last couple years in particular. The Bo Nix at quarterback has been up and down through his first 2 years, so it's been up and down overall for Auburn this year. The Tigers are 5-3. They've had a couple big blowouts. They're coming off a big loss, of course, last week in the Iron Bowl, getting blown out 42-13 by Alabama. I expect Auburn to be ready to play. And A&M kind of struggled last week with LSU. Of course, it's not the LSU of last year. LSU is 3-4 after their loss last week, and it's just not the same Tigers team. Clearly, they lost a lot from last year's squad. A&M did struggle in that game. They struggled to move the ball. They did win 20-7. And, in this wacky 2020 college football season, you do get a credit for getting a win. Sometimes it's just getting over that finish line, getting a W. But that being said, A&M has not been quite as impressive over the last couple weeks. I think this is going to be a good football game, and I think Auburn is going to be right there and give A&M some trouble again, just with their physicality up front. What I saw last week, I don't necessarily think is a good predictor for the Aggies in this football game. But that being said, I still think A&M can win the game. But look for this to be a close competitive game. I expect this to be one of the better games of the slate tomorrow. Currently Auburn is a 6.5-point underdog. I would jump on that if you have an opportunity to get an alternate spread in there. Maybe take them at 7.5 or 8. But I see Auburn making this a close game. I could see this being a field goal game right down to the end, and a rather low scoring game. I'm not going to touch the over under at 48.5. That's about right. But, I could see this being a little bit lower scoring as well, a 24-21 type of football game, somewhere in that general range. So a couple of games that I wanted to touch on tomorrow. Those are both in the early slate of action. Give you my picks there. So, moving on, we have some other games tomorrow that, of course, will play directly into the college football playoff race and where teams are going. Ohio State, of course, let's touch on the Buckeyes. They have kind of been the big talk this week. Not being able to get their game in last week, the Buckeyes have only played 4 games. They have 2 more scheduled, and that's it. Against Michigan State tomorrow, again, an early slate game. And then the big rivalry game with Michigan. The Buckeyes need to play both of those games to even be eligible for the Big Ten title game. So you have kind of this big debate going right now. All right, what if Ohio State only plays 1 more game? They're 5-0, no Big Ten championship. Are they worthy of a spot in the college football playoff? It's kind of a great debate. First things first, though, Ohio State needs to beat Michigan State tomorrow. They're a massive favorite. They're going in 23.5-point favorite. The game is on the road. Michigan State is coming off their best performance of the season. They upset Northwestern last week at home there in East Lansing, giving the Wildcats their first loss of the season. So a bit of a surprise there, but Michigan State has been a little bit up and down this year, a little bit bipolar. You're not really sure which version you're going to get. If you get the version that took care of Michigan early in the season by 10 points or so, or the version that upset Northwestern last week, surprisingly easily, actually, that's a pretty good football team. But if you get the version that showed up for the opener, that got routed at home by Rutgers, that's gotten completely blown out by Iowa, they don't have a chance in this game. So Ohio State's going to come in most likely missing some offensive linemen. I think that'll have an impact on the game. I still think the Buckeyes are going to win. I'm not sure about taking the 24 points here in this one. That might be a little bit too much. As awful as Michigan State has been at times this year, I still think that's a little lofty with the injuries up front for Ohio State. I think this is one where they're just looking to get the win, take care of business, and continue on, and hopefully get that game in with Michigan next week, and that will set them up for a Big Ten title game appearance and keep them, I think, in the running for that final spot in the college football playoff. So I like Ohio State tomorrow as well in that one, but look for that to be an interesting game, just with the COVID issues with the Buckeyes, and they're going to be shorthanded, especially along the offensive line. That could have an impact, on that game. So looking across the rest of the landscape tomorrow, of course, Notre Dame is also in action. The Irish are wrapping up their regular season. They're at home against Syracuse. The Orange have been awful this year. They're just 1-9, and they really just have not been that competitive in most games this year. So, last week they probably should have had a chance there against NC State. They botched the ending by spiking the ball on 4th down. But anywho, it's been that kind of season for Syracuse. They're at Notre Dame. I think the Irish don't have any problem. I think they put up tons of points and pummel Syracuse tomorrow to kind of wrap up their spot. And then just speaking on Notre Dame for a moment, I think that's going to solidify the Irish in the college football playoff. You look at it, yes, they have the win over Clemson. Was Clemson shorthanded? Yes, they were a little shorthanded in that game, of course. They were missing a couple key defensive players. Trevor Lawrence, of course, did not play. But all that being said, the Irish have a good enough resume. They put it together, and I think they're going to get the benefit of the doubt from the committee, being able to kind of play a full slate of games, get the volume in, and the win over Clemson, of course, will be a big one. If they lose to a 100%, full healthy Clemson team in an ACC title game, especially if it's a competitive game, I can't see the committee, penalizing them too much and dropping them behind another, say, one-loss team that maybe won't be competing for a conference title. So I like the Irish tomorrow. I like Florida to take care of Tennessee again. Tennessee is a 17.5-point underdog in that one. I'm going to take the Gators to win that game comfortably as well. And then continuing on, there is one game slated tomorrow to be a big one in the Big Ten, of course, featuring my Wisconsin Badgers, who have had a hard time just getting games in. They've only managed to get 3 in so far. They're 2-1. They're ranked number 16. They've had 2 great performances, blowing out Illinois and Michigan, and then struggling mightily against Northwestern, turning the ball over a whole bunch of times and struggling to score. They were off last week, and they are hosting Indiana tomorrow. That game is scheduled for a 12:30 kickoff West Coast, 3:30 East Coast time, and it should be one of the games of the day. Of course, Indiana has looked incredible. You go back 2 weeks ago to their game at Ohio State. They were down big. They came back. They were in that game the whole way, and you could argue, if not for a couple of gaffes that they made, at one point they picked off Justin Fields for a second time in the game, had a big interception return deep into Ohio State territory, and the guy got stripped and fumbled it and gave it back to Ohio State. So there are a few things where they had the momentum break their way, only to have it break right back to Ohio State, and they couldn't capitalize on some of the mistakes that the Buckeyes made. But you look at Indiana, I mean, their quarterback threw for 496 yards, I believe it was, in that game against Ohio State. Indiana's for real. They can throw the ball. They can move the ball. Their defense, of course, they've given up some points at times. I think this should be a good game. The Badgers coming in as a 14-point favorite seems, a little high to me. I think Wisconsin will be ready after their setback 2 weeks ago and not looking good against Northwestern. That being said, I like Indiana to make it a competitive game. It's been a banner year for the Hoosiers. They're 5-1. They're ranked number 12. And if they can finish the year somewhat strong here, they should go to a major bowl game for the first time in decades, guys. I mean, you got to go back a long, long time. The 80s was the last time Indiana was having success like this. And the last time they were in any kind of a running for a Big Ten title was 1967. So hats off to the Hoosiers. So my pick tomorrow, I like Wisconsin to win the game, but if I'm going to lay some money on that one, I'm probably taking Indiana to cover a 14-point spread. That seems a little bit lofty in my opinion. I like the Badgers, but more in the 7 to 11 point range in that game tomorrow. But by all counts, that should be a good one. There should be some points scored. I don't think Wisconsin will have trouble putting points on the board like they did against Northwestern. And, Indiana put 35 on Ohio State at Ohio State. So the Hoosiers can score. They're going to score. It should be a good, entertaining game. If you have an opportunity, check that one out tomorrow. I don't think either team is really in any kind of realistic running for a college football playoff spot, but it should be a fun, entertaining game tomorrow. I've got one other big game that I'd like to touch on tomorrow. And, in most other seasons, any other season, this might not necessarily be a huge game. But in 2020, in this season and the way things have gone, this is actually a big one. We've got BYU, who's undefeated. And in the AP and the coaches poll, they're ranked in the top 10. I've got BYU ranked at number 8. I agree with most pundits out there that the College Football Playoff Committee is continuing to undervalue them at number 13. We, of course, know the knock on the Cougars is their lack of quality schedule. Not really their fault, guys. I mean, they had 6 Power 5 conference teams on their schedule going into 2020 when the Pac-12 and Big Ten punted on the season early on. They lost those games. They had to scramble to fill a schedule. Of course, those conferences came back and then, didn't have enough room to wiggle in any games with BYU. So the Cougars were left scrambling to fill a schedule to play as many games as they could. Strength of schedule is lacking, no doubt about it. They do have an impressive win at Boise State, though, 51-17. Boise State's a good team. They've only lost one game. So you got to give the Cougars credit for that one. But anywho, they were able to go out and get Coastal Carolina on their schedule. Coastal Carolina is having a breakout season. They're 9-0. They're ranked number 18 by the College Football Playoff Committee, and by pretty much everybody else, they're in the top 15, including me. I've got the Chanticleers at number 14 this week. But you look at their wins, they have a road victory over Louisiana Lafayette, the Raging Cajuns, who are ranked highly. The Raging Cajuns only lost as that game to Coastal Carolina, and they have a victory over Iowa State, who looks like is going to be the regular season Big 12 champion. So, quality wins there. They beat Appalachian State last week for a big win. So Coastal Carolina actually has a couple of pretty good wins on their resume. Yes, it's the Sun Belt, but this is a different Sun Belt. It's 2020. All of the conferences are a little bit different than what we're normally accustomed to seeing. So, but this is a big game. Both teams are 9-0, and it's a very good opportunity for BYU to beat another undefeated team, a quality team. Yes, it's not a Power 5 team, but it's the best available game they could get outside of a Power 5 opponent, and in some cases, much better than a Power 5 opponent they could get. So you go out and get a 1 or 2 or 3 loss Power 5 opponent right now, that wouldn't help too much. But an undefeated Coastal Carolina team that is trending up, and that game is going to be on the road. So if BYU can go across the country and get a win, that will give them a boost. How much of a boost to their resume? Does it get them actually into the playoff picture? Because being ranked at number 13 right now, they're not in the picture. But that'll remain to be seen. But this might be one of the games of the day. BYU's going in as a 10-point favorite. I like both of these teams. I like the way they play. Coastal Carolina has been a tough football team. They've shown they can win big. They can win in close games. They can come from behind to win. This is going to be a real test for BYU. And if the Cougars go in and they dominate this game, believe me, that is going to be a statement game. I know it's Coastal Carolina, guys, but they have an opportunity right here to really show up and make a move up the rankings, especially when you look at some of the other teams ranked in the top 10 and who they're playing this week. Miami's playing Duke. Duke is 2-7, so not much is going to come from there. Alabama's at LSU. 2-5 Baylor's playing Oklahoma. So not a lot out there as far as other top 10 teams or teams ranked ahead of BYU being able to pick up necessarily a good quality resume boosting type of victory tomorrow. So I've got my eye on that game as well. And I'm very interested to see how the Cougars do and if they can do enough to kind of have an impact on the playoff committee and, be able to move up into the top 10 and actually kind of make a run for that final spot in the playoffs. So that is the slate tomorrow. I think I've touched on most of the games that I wanted to touch on. You know, we do have a full slate. There's some others. Oklahoma State at TCU should be a pretty good game tomorrow morning as well. Although not a lot on the line there. You know, both teams are out of the running for the Big 12 title game and so on. So that wraps up the preview for tomorrow's games. I'll touch very briefly on one other game. Clemson is at Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech is reeling right now. Clemson is a 22-point favorite. And I like the Tigers to just kind of go in there and hammer away at Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech, unfortunately, the last couple of seasons under Justin Fuentes has had some expectations. They've started fairly strong. They've had a few upset losses, and then they kind of just seem to pack it in. And unfortunately, I think Virginia Tech is in pack-it-in mode right now. I think Clemson is going to, probably go out and have another annihilation on their resume tomorrow. So look for Clemson to take care of the Hokies tomorrow. That is my final pick on the full slate of games tomorrow. Touching on the college football playoff and where that stands right now, if you start to break it down, I believe we've got one spot up for grabs, guys. I really do. If you look at it, Alabama, they should not have problem with LSU tomorrow. It's a let's be honest, not last year's LSU team. Alabama is better offensively, defensively. They have more playmakers on their team on both sides of the ball. It's very difficult to envision a scenario where LSU pulls that upset tomorrow. So I think Alabama is going to be in. If you look at if Alabama were to lose to Florida in the SEC title game, Florida is going to go in there as well with one loss. I don't think the Gators get upset by Tennessee tomorrow. It's very hard for me to picture that scenario happening. So you would go in there, and if you lose to Florida, Florida is going to be, number 6 by all accounts, maybe number 5 going into that SEC title game. That's not a bad loss, and it'll be Alabama's first loss. I just don't see the committee taking Alabama out of the equation. They've been so dominant this season. It would probably drop them back to the number 4 spot, number 3 spot. So I think Alabama's in. And then I think both Notre Dame and Clemson are most likely in. Again, barring the scenario that Notre Dame beats Clemson in the ACC title game for the second time, that would open up another potential spot. I don't think a 2-loss Clemson team without a conference title is going to get into the playoff this year. You could maybe make an argument for them, but I don't think it's going to happen, especially if Cincinnati finishes up undefeated and wins that American Athletic conference title game. You're going to have an undefeated conference champion, and the American Athletic has it's not been bad. It's had quality teams, just as many quality teams as the SEC this year and Big Ten when you start to go down the list. It's not the same conferences. The SEC has 5 quality teams, 5 teams ranked out of 14, 5 that are going to have a winning record. That's it. It's not a very deep conference this year like it is normally. And part of that is probably they're playing just a full conference schedule and kind of beating each other up. But you start taking those factors into account, and you start to look at, and you're kind of looking at possibly Ohio State, Cincinnati, and Texas A&M, in that equation for that final spot. But I think Notre Dame's going to be in, because even if the Irish lose to Clemson, it's going to be one loss, and it's going to be to Clemson. I don't think the committee is going to penalize them again. That volume will work. The victory earlier in the year over Clemson, and then the road victory last week at North Carolina really helped them out as well. So looking forward to the college football playoff and what we're looking at, I think that's kind of the scenario we are at right now. I would like to see BYU get in that mix. I think the Cougars are deserving of the conversation. They've just been so dominant, and they passed the eye test, the proverbial eye test and so on. But that being said, you look at analytics or anything else that's out there, and they are by far one of the more dominant teams out there. So yes, again, the strength of schedule has been a little bit on the weaker side, but that being said, like I said, that win at Boise State, 51-17, you have to go back a long time for a team that has been able to go up to Boise and really take it to the Broncos on their home turf up there, the blue turf. So yes, it's Boise State, they're a Mountain West team, but it is still a pretty good win and one of the better road victories out there for a team. So I like BYU to get into this mix. I really hope that they can have a good showing tomorrow against Coastal Carolina. And quite frankly, the winner of that game should at least get mentioned in the conversation. I'm not necessarily advocating to put Coastal Carolina ahead of a one-loss SEC team or Clemson or somebody like that. But these teams deserve to be in the mix and to be talked about a little bit. So that's what the college football playoff looks like, in my opinion, going forward. Very important weekend here for a couple teams in particular: Texas A&M, Florida, Ohio State. Really, really important weekend for those guys. And then, like I touched on, BYU, Coastal Carolina. Big game for those guys for an opportunity to possibly play themselves, if not into the college football playoff discussion, into a New Year's Day bowl game, and possibly a big matchup here for the end of the season. I'm sure we would definitely like to see that anyway. I would love to see how BYU matches up against some of these better teams, and same thing for Coastal Carolina, because I think they could actually give a lot of those teams a run for their money. So, and then lastly today, guys, in closing, to wrap up my first live college football show, and I again appreciate you guys jumping on today and supporting me, I want to touch base a little bit on Iowa State. The Cyclones are in position to wrap up a regular season title, Big 12 regular season championship, and then they would move on for the Big 12 title game, most likely against Oklahoma, a team they've already beaten. But Iowa State has not won a conference title in football since 1912. That is the longest streak of any Power 5 team out there. So my hat off to the Cyclones. What they've been able to do this year is very impressive. Again, knocking out Oklahoma earlier in the year, and they have kind of cruised right along. A couple weeks ago, 45-0 shellacking of Kansas State. So I take my hat off to Iowa State. The Cyclones are in the top 10. College Football Playoff Committee has got them in the top 10 as well. So congratulations to the Cyclones. It's a banner year for them. They're making history. They are on the verge of their first conference title, or at least a share of a first conference title since 1912. Pretty amazing stuff there, guys. So Sports Guy Chris checking in today. Again, wanted to give you my picks for tomorrow, cover some of the action, hit on a couple of the key games, and kind of give you an assessment of where the college football playoff landscape currently sits. I appreciate all you guys. I will be back again next week, jumping in, giving you my picks as we inch closer to the end of the college football season. Let's hope we can get as many games in as possible, and we can wrap this season up with what could potentially be a very entertaining and historic college football playoff, especially if one of these other teams jumps in, is able to kind of have a mini coup and break through and jump in and join the big boys, so to speak, in the playoffs. So I would love to see it, and I think this year, if any year is going to happen, has given us the opportunity to see that. So have a great weekend, everybody. Enjoy the games tomorrow. Again, at SportsGuyChris. You can find me on YouTube, Instagram, all of those great platforms. I will be jumping on and doing some more lives and having some more great content out there. Beginning of next week, I'll have my updated top 25 out there as well. So again, happy weekend, everybody. Enjoy all the action tomorrow. Thank you again, at SportsGuyChris. I'll see you guys again soon. Have a great weekend.